Okay, so I want to speak just a little bit. Again, this week we've kind of taken a break from our Talmud Devorah, and I want to talk about the fast that we're having on Friday, very unusual, which is the fast of Asara B'Teves. And Asara B'Teves is one of the 4 fast days that we have throughout the year that commemorate events that are connected to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Chronologically, Asara B'Teves is the very first of those days. That was the day that Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia, began his siege against Yerushalayim, which culminated in the Churban Beis Hamikdash 3 years later. Right, that's Asara B'Teves. The next event is the 17th of Tammuz, but there it's a little complicated. The 17th of Tammuz is identified as a lot of tragedies, the Chet Egel, the breaking of the Luchais, but Lagabi, the Beis Hamikdash, it was the day that Yerushalayim was broken into. The wall was breached. But here is the complication a little bit. The Pasuk in Yirmiyahu says it was the 9th of Tammuz, and therefore Chazal say the 9th of Tammuz was the first Beis Hamikdash. The 17th of Tammuz was when the Romans broke into the second Beis Hamikdash, or the walls of Yerushalayim, at the time of the Churban of the second Beis Hamikdash. So, in reality, there's kind of a disconnect between Asara B'Teves and Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, meaning there's no linear connection. Asara B'Teves is when Nebuchadnezzar began his siege against Yerushalayim. The 17th of Tammuz is when the armies of Titus broke into Yerushalayim, but that would have been the 9th of Tammuz at the time of the Babylonians. The third is, of course, Tisha B'Av, which is the Churban Bayis Rishon, and 490 years later, the Churban Bayis Sheni. And then the final one is Som Gedalia, which after Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple, Gedaliah was appointed as governor over the few Jews that remained in Eretz Yisrael. Gedaliah was assassinated the Tishrei after the Churban. Some say it was actually Rosh Hashanah, but you don't fast in Rosh Hashanah, so we push it off to the 3rd of Tishrei. So it turns out, an interesting kind of dichotomy here, that Asara B'Teves is only connected to the first Beis Hamikdash. Shiva Asar B'Tammuz is only connected to the second Beis Hamikdash. Tisha B'Av is connected to both. And Som Gedalia is also only connected to the first. Right? So the 10th of Teves and Som Gedalia are commemorating events of the Churban Bayis Rishon. And even though many tzaddikim were assassinated, but Gedaliah's death was kind of the nail in the coffin to show that the Beis Hamikdash was not going to be rebuilt for a number of years, for 70 years. Now, of these different fast days, it's very, very strange because we know that Asara B'Teves is the only one of those fast days that can occur on a Friday, and we fast on Friday. But the Avudraham, one of the great Rishonim on Tefillah that the Beis Yosef brings, says even a bigger chiddush. The Avudraham says, if Asara B'Teves were to fall out on Shabbos, you would even fast on Shabbos. Asara B'Teves would be Docha Shabbos. Now, this is an unprovable proposition, simply because under the Jewish calendar as we have it, Asara B'Teves can never fall out on Shabbos. The reason is because everything depends on Rosh Hashanah. Given the fact that the first day of Rosh Hashanah cannot be on Sunday, Wednesday, Friday, so given the number of days in Cheshvan and Kislev, you will never have Asara B'Teves on Shabbos. But nevertheless, Avudraham says, theoretically, it would be Docha. And the proof of he proves it by saying that the Navi Yecheskel was told before the siege began, write down B'etzem Hayom Hazeh, write down that on this very day, the 10th of Teves, Nebuchadnezzar will begin his siege on Yerushalayim. So Asara B'Teves is described with the phrase B'etzem Hayom Hazeh, on that very day. And the Avudraham points out that is the same lashon the Torah uses on Yom Kippur, B'etzem Hayom Hazeh. So just as Yom Kippur is Docha Shabbos, Asara B'Teves is Docha Shabbos. Now, this is a proof, somewhat of a proof, so to speak, that Asara B'Teves is Docha Shabbos. But we have to ask ourselves, what is the logic of that? I mean, if we ask ourselves, which is a more chomor fast? Is it the 9th of Av? Or is it, Asara B'Teves is the beginning of a process that culminated in the Churban Beis HaMikdash 3 years later. But Tisha B'Av itself, the actual day of the Churban Beis HaMikdash, if the 9th of Av falls out on Shabbos, we fast on Sunday, Motzei Shabbos and Sunday. So how could it be that Asara B'Teves would have a bigger koach, would be more chomor than Tisha B'Av? How could that be? Like, why would Asara B'Teves be Docha Shabbos and the 9th of Av is not Docha Shabbos? So there are two terutzim that are given. One teretz is given by the Or Sameach, by Rav Meir Simcha, who actually points out that even though you're not allowed to fast on Shabbos, but there are different levels of severity, and the most severest level of fasting is a 24-hour fast. So the pshat is like this. Normally you don't fast on Shabbos, but for the Churban Beis HaMikdash, we would allow you to fast even on Shabbos, as long as it's not a 24-hour fast. So Memela, he says like this. So Tisha B'Av could not be Docha Shabbos, because that would be a 24-hour tainus. Masha'enkein Asara B'Teves could be Docha Shabbos, because that wouldn't be a 24-hour fast, and even though even less than a 24-hour fast is normally Asar, but for the Churban Beis HaMikdash, we would be Docha. This is what the Meshech Chochmah, or the Or Sameach says, but the truth is, it's a big tzorech, because I'll tell you the problem. The problem is, when Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, Shiva Asar B'Tammuz also falls out on Shabbos, 3 weeks earlier. So Shiva Asar B'Tammuz is not a 24-hour fast, and there too, we don't fast on Shabbos. In other words, to tell me I don't fast when Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos because it's 24 hours, but I would fast if Asara B'Teves falls out on Shabbos because it's not 24 hours. If that's the case, then why don't I fast on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, which is not a 24-hour fast? So that's a bit of a tzorech that for some reason the Or Sameach does not address. But let me give you another explanation for the Avud Raham's opinion, and this is from the Chassam Sofer. He points out that even though you're not allowed to fast on Shabbos because of Oneg Shabbos, pleasure of Shabbos, there is one fast that you actually are allowed to fast on Shabbos. Now again, Yom Kippur is different. Yom Kippur is a Torah fast. That's a separate issue. But there's one fast that's not a Torah fast that you still fast on Shabbos, and this is a Tainis Chalom. What does that mean? Let's say a person has a dream that's a frightening dream, a dream of tragedy, a dream that somebody dies or something bad happens. So there is a halacha. It's not a chiyuv. You can give tzedakah, do other things, but there is a halacha that there is a concept of fasting, so that Hashem should annul the bad dream and the like. Now this is called Tanis Chalom, and you would fast it the day after you had the dream, and it's brought down that a Tanis Chalom is mutter even on Shabbos, but strangely enough, you then have to have another fast as a kapara for the sin of fasting on Shabbos. So let's say a person had a very bad dream Friday night, and they're frightened. Now you never know. Sometimes dreams are prophecies from Hashem, like this whole story of Yosef. Sometimes dreams are just indigestion or whatever it is. You never know. Chazal say, just like there's no grain without chaff and straw, there is no dream without things that are just, worthless. So a person doesn't know, but a person wants to fast. So he had a bad dream on Friday night, he fasts on Shabbos. Is it mutter to fast? Yeah, it's mutter. But he has to make another fast on Monday or Tuesday because he fasted on Shabbos. Now this is very hard to understand. If it's mutter for him to fast, why would he need a fast as a kapara for fasting that was mutter to fast? it's a good question. There's not really a good answer to it. But nevertheless, the bottom line is, Tainis Chalaim is Mutter b'Shabbos. So the Chazam Sofer ponders, why would a Tainis Chalaim be Mutter b'Shabbos when other fasting is not allowed on Shabbos? What is special about a Tainis Chalaim? So the Chazam Sofer offers the following chiluk. The type of fasting that is usher on Shabbos is a fasting that is an expression of sadness for tragedies of the past. So I don't fast on Tisha B'Av when it falls out on Shabbos because I'm not supposed to be misabel the Beis HaMikdash, Shiva Sar B'Tammuz, Tzom Gedalia. Any fast that is focused on the tragedies of the past, you don't do that on Shabbos because that's a form of Avelos, which is not done on Shabbos. Now, Shiva Sar B'Tammuz, Asara B'Teves on one level is, of course, fasting over the past. But the Chazam Sofer says Asara B'Teves has a special element to it. And that is, Asara B'Teves is the Yom Hadin. It is the day of judgment, whether the Beis HaMikdash is going to be rebuilt this year. Just like on Rosh Hashanah, God decides that who will live and who will die, and the writing is on Rosh Hashanah, and the sealing is on Yom Kippur. Asara B'Teves is both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It is the day that HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides, will we be zocheh to the Beis HaMikdash this year? So as a result, he says, it's very different than even the 9th of Av. The 9th of Av is fasting as a form of mourning for tragedy. Asara B'Teves is fasting to put us into a matzaf of tshuva so we will be zocheh to a binyan Beis HaMikdash. In fact, that might be the Chazam Sofer says, that might be the inner meaning of the Avudraham comparing Asara B'Teves to Yom Kippur. It's not just the linguistic similarity of Bi'etzem Hayom Hazeh, but just as we fast on Yom Kippur to have atonement so that God should give us a good life, Asara B'Teves we are fasting to be Zeicha to the Binyan Beis HaMikdash. And therefore the Chazam Sofer says the heter, or even the chiyuv, of fasting of Asara B'Teves would be on Shabbos, it would be similar to a Tainis Chalaim, which is a fast to avert a future calamity, rather than a fast of mourning over the past. It's the Yom Hadin of Binyan Beis HaMikdash. Now, what does that mean, though? That means, on Asara B'Teves, the Chazam Sofer says, Hashem decides whether we'll merit a Beis HaMikdash. Now, let's assume, God forbid, God would decide that we are not yet deserving of a Beis HaMikdash. Does that mean that after Asara B'Teves, there's no reason to daven for the Beis HaMikdash? Well, the answer is, it's exactly the way Yom Kippur works, right? On Yom Kippur or Hoshana Rabbah, whatever last day you want to pick, right? God decides, will you live or you'll die? So why do I have to daven the day after Yom Kippur? God either gave me life or didn't give me life. The answer is, things can always change, meaning even after a Gemar Din, there's Rachamim. So yeah, even after a Gemar Din, there could be mercy and the like, but still, it's much better for me to get my defense before the Gemar Din. In other words, it's harder to change a Gemar Din. Once a decision is made, it is a harder process to get it changed. Now is a very auspicious time to be mispalel to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right, so this is the Chazam Sofer's Chiddush about Asara B'Teves. It is the Yom Hadin Shel Binyan Beis HaMikdash. It is like a Tainis Chalaim, in which the fasting is to avert a future calamity or to be zocha to a future bracha, and that's why it would be docha Shabbos. Again, as I say, the Avudraham's Chiddush is only hypothetical because our calendar does not allow Asara B'Teves to be on Shabbos. But this is the famous Chiddush of the Avudraham that the Beis Yosef brings in the as commentary to the Torah. Now, this is the fast of Asara B'Teves. It's going to be Friday, but once again, it happens to be the shortest fast of the year. But coming into Shabbos in a state of tinus is indeed a very unusual type of situation. Yeah.
Just wondering if I talk about the tinus alone. I heard that if one had news, let's say one had bad news earlier in the day, and then dreams that night about a tragic death, because they were influenced by the thoughts of the day, they wouldn't have to fast.
Yeah, that would be correct. Meaning, if you could connect the dream to an actual thing that happened, so we assume it's just psychological distress and it's not prophetic. That's correct. Yeah.
So assuming the dream is like personal nevuah, and nevuah seems to carry like a ton of weight. The Rav mentioned previously a case of a temporary suspension of a rule, I think by Eliyahu, and bringing korban outside of the Beis Hamikdash. I'm sorry if this is too open-ended, but like, why does nevuah carry so much power? Like, it seems obvious in one sense, but in another way, it kind of eludes me as to why we give it so much ability to like overrule laws.
Well, in a way, I think the reason is self-evident because assuming it's true nevuah, it's a message from God. One would assume that messages from God carry weight. Now, you're correct. The major problem is, how do I know if it's God's message or my own hallucinations? That's a good question. But once we can resolve the issue of true nevuah, it surely will carry a tremendous amount of weight. In fact, if anything, the question is really the opposite, meaning, why does nevuah have any limitations at all? Because the halacha is, unless it's a temporary thing, a nevuah cannot change a mitzvah. Why not? God can't change. God gave you a mitzvah of Shabbos. God then tells you b'nevuah to violate Shabbos. What do I say to God? I can't listen to you? I mean, the question is really not the question you're asking. The question is, why would nevuah be limited at all? Because it is really the highest source of divine will, is God telling you what his will is. Okay, so now I want to just mention another thing. If you look at the slichos of Asara B'Teves, which Mirz Hashem, we're going to be reciting Friday morning. Actually, I should say, Mirz Hashem, we won't be reciting, because maybe we should be zeicha to the Beis Hamikdash before then, but if chas v'shalom, we still have to recite it Friday morning, you will actually notice that it mentions there were 3 days of sorrows, 3 days of suffering. And indeed, it is brought down in Makores that there were tzaddikim who fasted 3 days in a row, eating at night. They fasted the 8th of Teves, the 9th of Teves, and the 10th of Teves. 8, 9, 10. There were tsaros on each of those days, but not at the same time, not at the same time period. The 8th of Teves was said to be the day that the 70 elders completed the translation of the Torah into Greek. This is called the Septuagint, which is just Greek for the work of the 70. And if you remember the story, this was during the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. And Alexandria had a very, very large Jewish community living in the diaspora. And one of Alexander's successors, Talmai, this was a whole dynasty, the Ptolemaic dynasty, but one of the Talmais, he had erected a library, like the Library of Congress, that had all of the written works of the world. Of course, there weren't that many in those days, but all of the books in the world. And he wanted to have the Torah translated into Greek so it could be kept in his library. And he summoned 70 of the Chachamim. He put them in separate rooms, and he wanted them to translate the Torah into Greek. And Chazal tell us that there was a miracle, that even though they were in separate rooms, they all came up with the same translation, including deviations, in order to avoid misunderstanding. So, for example, he gives a few examples, like Bereshis bara Elokim, which, if you translated it absolutely literally, it would mean the beginning created God. So in order to indicate that God was not created, they inverted the word order. God created the beginning, type of things like that. Or in the list of non-kosher animals, The Arneves, the rabbit, is listed, and the Greek for Arneves was the name of Talmai's wife. I think Bernice. I think Bernice actually means rabbit in Greece. So his wife was Bernice, so they didn't want to put Bernice's treif, so they changed it to something else. And all of these different shinuyim came up with Ruach HaKodesh. Of course, some people like to say a cute word. They say, it was a nace that they were in separate rooms and they came up with the same translation. It would have been a bigger miracle had they been in one room and they would have come up with the same translation, because they would certainly get into machlokas there. But okay, now, this is called the Septuagint, Targum HaShivim. We actually have it. We have it in Greek, and we have Hebrew translations of the Greek, and we have English translations of the Hebrew translations of the Greek, or directly from the Greek. Now, one thing I do want to point out, if you get a Septuagint, and you can get it online, you will see a Septuagint on all of Tanakh, etc. That is not original, though. The original Targum HaShivim was only on Chumash. The other things are much, much later. Now, the Septuagint had a tremendous influence on Christianity, meaning the early Christians, many of them knew Hebrew, but Greek was their main language. The early Christians essentially learned the Torah through the Septuagint. The Septuagint had very, very little influence, even though the rabbis who did it were Chachamim, but it did not really become part of the Jewish Messiah that much. Now here we see the following. The day that it was completed, in the reign of Talmai, was the 8th of Teves, and that was a day of darkness and mourning and sadness. There were people who fasted on that day because of the completion of the Torah in Greek. So you might say, what's so bad about that? So why isn't that a happy day? In fact, Philo of Alexandria, who was a Jewish philosopher in Alexandria, actually said that in Alexandria, that day was celebrated as a holiday by the Jews, because it was like the art scroll of the first century. That Baruch Hashem, we have a translation of the Torah in Greek that we can learn. Philo records it as a Yom Tov, while Chazal say, in Eretz Yisrael, they say it was a tragedy. And
if you got in the Gemara Megillah,
Yeah.
it says 72 though. How come it said that 72 Chachamim were there? I assume it's speaking about the same event. How come it's called the
Yeah. Yeah, why does it say 70? Yeah, I don't know. I have to check the nusach. I believe in Megillah itself there are two girsais, if it's 70 or 72. Septuagint, I think, is 70. In fact, the scholarly abbreviation is LXX, which is the Roman numeral for 70. It's not LXXII. I'll check it. I don't know. But there are, in the Gemara Gufa, there are two girsais in the Gemara itself. So there are a lot of reasons why Chazal looked at it as a tragedy. One reason is that, number one, it was a tragedy that so many Jews, Alexandria, were very assimilated, didn't know Hebrew, and they had to learn the Torah from Greek. In fact, if you remember, the Gemara Megillah discusses the halachos. Can you write a Sefer Torah in Greek? And, I remember learning this, years and years ago, and I was wondering, who would ever write a Sefer Torah in Greek? Like, what type of discussion is this? In truth, this is not just a theoretical question. There are some sources that indicate that in Alexandria, they read the Torah in Greek. They wrote Sifrei Torah in Greek. That is how illiterate they were. Even Philo. Philo was considered to be the most observant of the Alexandrian Jews, the most learned of the Alexandrian Jews. There are some who say he didn't know how to read Hebrew. This is a machlokas among Philo scholars. But ad kedei kach, that their biggest guy may not have, he knew Chumash in the sense that he talks about Chumash Anach, but he may have known it only from the Greek. Yeah.
You can actually write a Megillah scroll in ancient Greek. I think that's in the Mishnah that would be kosher.
That's correct. So I was always wondering, was there ever a case where somebody did that? The answer is they did. They actually did it.
But just on the point, so having the
Yeah.
Can he become learned without reading Hebrew?
Well, we got the same thing today. I'm not putting people down. I mean, there are people who have finished Shas with an art scroll. Yes, it does count. I mean, I was a little scared because I don't want, the center rabbis to come after me. I mean, listen. Obviously, the goal is to learn it in its original. That's why it was a tragedy. But it also was something good at the same time. Meaning, with the Art Scroll, it was the same issue. When Art Scroll came out, the first Art Scroll came out in the 1970s. So some people were saying how wonderful it was, and other people were saying, remember the Septuagint in which it was considered to be said. And the answer is, it's a mixture of both. Baruch Hashem that people who can't read Hebrew can learn Torah. That is a good thing. But chaval that people can't read Hebrew. So it's a bad thing. So things can be good and bad at the same time, right? So Philo learned stuff in translation like many people do today, yeah.
So what's the difference between the Septuagint and the Art Scroll in that?
Yeah. So now we have other considerations. So one cheshbon is that the Septuagint was a sad thing that so many Jews relied upon it. So that's one hezbollah, and that's like the Art Scroll issue. Others say it was the other way around. It wasn't so much that Jews were using it, but the Torah was now made more accessible to non-Jews, who could then pervert it and distort it and the like. So Art Scroll theoretically is the same thing, of course, but Lamaisa, with marketing and the like, it doesn't really reach non-Jewish audiences. In other words, this was a different thing. This was put in the big, library, international library, etc. And the other thing is, too, that this was the first breach, meaning like this. The Torah has already been translated in a gazillion languages. So you might as well have one that is reliable to the Masorah. But this was kind of the first break. And Chazal thought that was a sad thing, that the Goyim could now distort the Torah. Yeah.
Doesn't it say that the Torah was translated into 70 languages?
Yeah. So that's a good question. That's a very good question. People ask this question. Number one, what is so bad about the Septuagint in Greek? Moshe Rabbeinu himself did translate the Torah into 70 languages. And B'chlal, what happened to those? What happened to those translations? I mean, those translations did they get lost? Did they get, So, actually, I don't have an answer to did they get lost, but I will tell you that this brings us to a third issue, meaning issue number one was that Jews had to rely on this crutch. Issue number two is the Goyim had access to the Torah to falsify it. Issue number three, and this would answer your question, is that the fact that the Chachamim had to introduce changes in the Torah, even though they did it for good reasons, created a very dangerous precedent, because they established the idea that if things are not politically correct, you can deviate. Now, it's true that their deviations were not nogea lahalacha, but you see how dangerous it is. So a person might say, oh, that verse about, can't have gay, relations, that doesn't fit today. Let's take it out, So it was very, very dangerous. Now, that wasn't a danger with Moshe's translations, because he did not deviate at all from the Lashon of the Torah. So we have these three different reasons why the 8th of Teves was considered to be a bad time, even though Philo says in Alexandria it was like a Purim. They made it like a festive day. Just to show you the disconnect between Eretz Yisrael and Alexandria. Okay. Although Philo did visit Jerusalem once. Philo actually went to the Second Temple. He records that he paid one visit to the Beis HaMikdash in his life. Yeah.
In regards, specifically to the homosexuality thing,
Yeah.
In the Torah, and not wanting to offend the Greeks.
Yep.
Maybe not most people, but historians are aware that in ancient Greece there was ubiquitous homosexuality and pedophilia, and couldn't you posit that, leaving that in there, that homosexuality is a sin according to the Torah would have been offensive?
Yeah, that is a very, very excellent question. I mean, because Chazal lists a bunch of changes that they did make not to cause offense, But all of them are minor changes. You know, they changed word sequences. They changed. They found another synonym for rabbit that didn't say bernice or whatever it is. But there's absolutely no indication that they changed. They took out a halacha of homosexuality. They never would have done that, right? And yet, you're correct. If there's a concern for offense, that would indeed be something. It's a good question, as far as I know, and I believe you can check this yourself in the Septuagint itself. The prohibition against homosexuality is there. They did not take it out. It's a very good question. I don't have an answer. I mean, my answer is that they just couldn't do that. They couldn't distort the Torah. Did that have some negative effect on them vis-a-vis the Greeks? I don't know, but it's a very good aura. So that's the 8th of Teves. That's the 10th of Teves. And now we're left with the middle date. What happened on the 9th of Teves? So in Megillas Taanis it says, the Chachamim decreed that the 9th of Teves is a sad day, is a tragic day, but they didn't give a reason. So it says, not telling. So that's kind of intriguing, not telling. So the Selichos say the 9th of Teves was the death of Ezra. Ezra lived at the very beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash. And Ezra, in many ways, the book of Ezra, was considered to be second in importance to Moshe Rabbeinu himself. And therefore, when Ezra HaKohen, he was a Kohen, died, they were Koveya a Tainus on the 9th of Teves. Now then there's a machlokas. Some say he died on the 10th of Teves, but they wanted to make a special fast for him, so they made it the 9th of Teves. So that's what the Slichos say. In fact, it's an interesting machlokas, Ashkenazic and Sephardic Slichos. The Ashkenazic Slichos say Ezra died on the 9th of Teves. The Sephardic Slichos say Ezra died on the 10th of Teves, but they made a fast day on the 9th to make it special. But if that's true, you're left with the obvious question, why are you keeping that a secret? I mean, it's a simple thing. We are fasting on the 9th of Teves because this is the death of Ezra HaSofer. So, because of this, different Achronim have tried to unearth hidden reasons for the mysterious fast of the 9th of Teves that we don't want to make so public. It got to be something more than, Ezra died. There's no reason to keep that a secret. So there are two suggestions that have been made. One suggestion is it was the birthday of Yashka. Now, again, you have to go back and figure this out. The Christians say it was December 25 of whatever year it was, probably the year 4 BC, I think it was. Right? Yashka was born BC. He was born a few years because the calendar is not right, etc. So some say that year they make a cheshbon that the 9th of Teves was the birthday of Yashka. So we fast, we mourn over Yashka being born into the world. And obviously we don't want to publicize that because throughout most of our history in the Christian world, that would have been very dangerous, that we're publicly mourning the birth, not the death, the birth of Yashka. Others give even a more strange reason, and that is we are fasting because it is the yahrzeit, the death of Shimon Kippah, a man called Shimon Kippah. Kippah is Aramaic for rock. Simon the Rock. Who is Simon the Rock? Simon the Rock is none other than Jesus' apostle, Simon Peter. Peter, Petra is rock in Greek, right? Peter's name was Shimon, and Yashka renamed him Petra. You are my rock, so to speak. And therefore, we are mourning over the death of Shimon Kippah, like he'd be a tzaddik. Why would that be so? I understand mourning over the birth of Yashka. Okay, that's fine. But mourning over the death of Peter? So here, there is something called a medrash, but it's not a real medrash. It's a later medrash. So it's not from Chazal necessarily, but it is a medrash that some Rishonim bring. in which they make a whole narrative story that Shimon Kippur, who became the first bishop of Rome, Shimon Kippur is the first pope, Peter is the first pope, that he acted totally l'shem shamayim, that he saw in the early years of Christianity that the first Christians were Jews, and they were davening in our shuls. Right? The Mishnah, remember, the Mishnah in Megillah says all sorts of things. If a chazan does certain things, you remove him. If he dresses in white or he repeats certain things. You know, if you don't know the historical context, some of it doesn't make sense. Like what, really it was referring to the infiltration of Christian worship within the Beis Knesset. And this could have been, like Messianic Jews today, this could have destroyed Judaism, in which the Christians are literally within your shul conducting services. So Shimon Kippur said he volunteered to go on a spiritual suicide mission. He said, I will make Christianity a separate religion. I will separate them from Judaism. I will become the head of a Christian church. I will, therefore, like a magnet, I will draw the Christians out of Judaism. And he says, I know I will never be in the Jewish community again. I know I may lose my olam haba, but I'm doing this to preserve Klal Yisrael from the infiltration of Christians. And the Medrash goes on that Simon Peter, the Shimon Kippur, continued to wear tefillin, continued to keep Shabbos privately, did all sorts of things, but he never publicly had any kesher to the Jewish community at all. But it's also brought down a tradition that he asked them, could you recite one tefillah that I wrote? And some say Nishmas, the beautiful prayer Nishmas, was authored by Shimon Kippur. So what we say every Shabbos is a prayer written by the Apostle Peter. Now, the Machzor Vitri, which was written by a Talmud of Rashi, brings such a tradition and then argues with it. So it's important to know. You're going to hear people say, oh, the Machzor Vitri says that Nishmas was written by Shimon Kippur. That is not true. The Machzor Vitri says Nishmas was not written by Shimon Kippur, but he brings Yesh Omrim that it was written, and to commemorate the idea that Shimon Kippur gave up his Jewish life for the benefit of Am Yisrael. Chazal said we will celebrate remember his yortzeit every day, so that he should have a chelek in Olam Haba because of what he did. And once again, the Chachamim didn't want to be mefarsem this reason, because this is probably because Jews wouldn't understand it. We're celebrating the yortzeit of Shimon Kippur, but this is so. We have three different interpretations. One is death of Ezra, but again, why would that be a secret? The other is birth of Yashka, and the third is death of Shimon Kippur. Yeah.
The Medrash you got about Simon. I
Yep.
also heard this said about Peter too. So
No, Simon and Peter is the same guy, but it is said about Paul.
Paul, sorry,
Yes, Simon and Peter are the same person. Yes, it's very, very true that in the 19th century, a lot of scholars said it about Paul. Now, Paul never knew Yashka. Paul didn't even become a Christian until after Jesus was dead. But the Medrash doesn't say it about Paul. The Medrash says it, whose name was Shaul. The Medrash says it about Shimon Kippur. So it is different than what you might have heard. Yeah.
Do we know if the midrash, this midrash you're reciting is from the time of the Goinim or the Rishonim?
It is certainly no earlier than the time of the Ga'anim, and it might be from the Rishonim, meaning there are a lot of things. These are not, as I say, these are not in the official midrashim of Chazal, so their authority is mafukpak. Their authority is not considered binding at all, but it is brought by some Rishonim, so it is brought, so it did get assimilated within a partial of the Messiah of Am Yisrael. Again, the Machzor Vitri brings it, but again, even though he brings it to argue with it, but he does bring it, which means it did get circulated. Yeah.
Should we have like our DOS in mind for any of these possibilities? Like if this is the reason, then let it be that I have this in mind.
Make it tonight.
like just branching
Yeah.
out or whatever it is. should we have any of this in mind, these potentials, when we're actually in the...
Well, first of all, keep in mind that this is for the 9th of Teves, right? We don't fast. In other words, if you're a person who fasts on the 9th of Teves, you'd have these different things in mind. But we fast on the 10th of Teves, so Baruch Hashem, you don't have the complications. Okay, Shpi, well, take care.
Thank you for listening to this Awesome Ech production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.